Ryan and Allison are high school sweethearts. And in the beginning of the book, we see where they go into the park. They go into this, oh, it's not really a park, but it's like a makeout spot to have a little picnic and whatever. So while they were there, a vehicle pulled up, and before they knew it or could even react, whoever was in the vehicle grabbed Allison and took off, and they left Ryan there. So after this happened, Allison was never found, and so this whole time, it's been years. I want to say, was it 10 years or so? Um, and this whole time, they had suspected that Ryan killed her because she was never found. There's never any communication. But although the authorities were circling him for the longest time, and everybody in the community pretty much called him a murderer and had their suspicions about him, there was never any proof that he did anything. And he was insisting also that he was innocent. So his life kind of, got torn apart in that sense, because there was always this shroud of suspicion around how she disappeared. So years later now, he is working on being a lawyer. And so they're taking this trip or a retreat kind of for some association that he's in to Italy. And so while he's there, he gets a letter advising him to meet somewhere, and it's kind of threatening in a sense. So even though he's supposed to go somewhere with his group that day, he decided that he wasn't going to go, that he tells them, go without me. And even though it's been years and years since this thing happened with Allison, it didn't seem like he was really over it. There is a girl in the group, her name was Nora. It seemed like there was something going on between them, but it doesn't seem like he's really wholeheartedly in it. And so, it's kind of lukewarm between them, but she seems like she really cares about him. But anyway, so even though the group, they want him to come along, they kind of give him his space because they know that's how he is, and gently try to encourage, but then they know at what point to kind of back off. So they take off, and he's supposed to meet this guy. So he shows up and to the spot where he was supposed to meet the guy, and when the guy showed up, he was surprised to find out that it was this guy who was involved in Allison's abduction. He didn't remember anything from the night because it was kind of turning dark when this all went down. But because of the allegations against him, at one point he had gone through hypnotherapy, and one thing he remembered was that the guy was missing his pinky? Missing a finger on each side. I believe it was a pinky. And that was it. There was nothing else that he could tell the police. And of course they thought he was crazy. Like, really? What are the odds? But anyway, he was like, oh my goodness. And so he was worried because now here's this guy who's missing the pinky. And so now he's worried that this guy is going to, do something. But he was panicking because he was saying that, he needs to tell the authorities that he didn't do anything, and kind of reinforce the whole story, because if there's any doubt that he was not the one who did it, if there's any doubt in the original story and they start looking elsewhere, there's going to be serious problems, and that, that could cause Allison to be killed. Well, he said her, which was referring to Allison. So now he was like, okay, so it seemed like Allison is still alive. But this guy, while they were meeting, he received a phone call and he was really panicked. And from what he could hear, it seemed like there's some threat against some woman. And so he took off. Now, later on in the investigation, another thing that led to them kind of leaving him alone in a sense, although the suspicion was still there, was that Allison's, I think a hair of hers, was found in some belongings that belonged to the serial killer who was operating in the area at that time. And so I think that contributed to them like, okay, we don't believe you, but the evidence has shown us otherwise. And so this guy needs him to stick to that story because he didn't believe he still, even though it's been years, he really wants to prove that he had nothing to do with it. And though he's laid low over the years because of the fact that there's something brewing and his life is in danger, he reached out to him. But what are the odds of this person knowing that he's in Italy and coming to find him there to talk to him? And why would he want to help the guy who abducted his girlfriend and turned his life upside down? So anyway, he decides, like, okay, I have to figure out where Allison is, and I need to prove that I didn't do it. And if she's alive, what other proof, what better proof is there that he wasn't involved? So they were staying at this Airbnb, and so he decided to follow the guy, and the girl Nora was involved with helping him, and she had put a tracker on his vehicle. Well, it was not a tracker. It was some chip that was supposed to be for the luggage. Yeah, the luggage chip, and she had put on the vehicle. Even though he didn't want her to get involved, she did, and ultimately she had tracked him to another Airbnb, and when he went there, he kind of played up the guise of, potentially having their retreat there and talking, and then he inadvertently kind of peeped into the guest logbook or whatever and figured out the name of the guy. It was a generic name, but he was an American who was living in the UK, and so he decides, well, he's gonna have to go over there to I guess follow up on a lead and see what he could find out. And even though everybody was telling him don't do it, he still was hell bent on doing that. And so from there, when he ended up in the UK and he was asking around in the general area where this guy was from, people weren't wanting to talk to him. And then when he finally figured out around the area where the guy lived, what do you know, that he found the guy brutally, what's the correct word for YouTube now? He had been brutally attacked and was no longer alive. And so while he was there in panic and a state of shock, the police came. And of course they thought he was involved, but he was like, no, I had nothing to do with it. And he didn't have any evidence of him being in a fight or whatever. There's no blood evidence, no nothing. Of course, they held him there. And after a while, he was released because clearly he had nothing to do with that. So, meanwhile, in this story as well, we're going into the life of this accountant. And he was in with this mobster. And initially I thought this was two stories, but this kind of intertwined with Allison's life and how she ended up being in the same town as Ryan, which was someplace in Kansas, because originally her family was from Philadelphia. And so later on in the book, as we're going along, we find out the story about how her dad ended up working for the mob and how, he got tied into that for years and years because of something that his wife had done. And I think at this point that this all went down, she had already passed on. So she pretty much kind of tied him into a debt with the mob because of something that she did. And so even though he's the guy's right-hand man, he knows that he can't be trusted. And he wants to get away, but he kind of cannot because he knows what the guy is capable of. So he's just hanging around, doing these financial deals, setting up the offshore accounts, doing all this crazy stuff that he shouldn't be doing, but operating under the guise of, a legitimate business. So there was something that went down with the mobster's kid in college. I think they were in some private school. So his kid, who was Allison, as we know her now, because at that point that wasn't her name, they went to the same school. And so he went out, the son of the mobster went out, and he came back distraught. And so he wouldn't talk to them. He said he didn't want to talk to them about it. And so he asked him to find out what's going on. Maybe Allison could talk to him and find out what's going on. And there was something that happened while they were out, and there was video proof of it. And unfortunately, Allison was in the video. And so after the mob boss found this out, everybody who was involved in the son's this situation with his son started dying. So now she knew that he knew that even though he was his right hand man, he's not going to let this go unpunished. And Allison was going to be next. So he had to leave the area, and he got the help of a couple guys, buddies of his, when he was in the military. So they were still in touch and helped each other out and check in or whatever. And so this is how he ended up in Kansas. So in him taking off, he was supposed to make some transfers for the guy, and he instead transferred the money into his own account and took off. So, in addition to what the daughter had done, that makes things a million times worse. So before he took off, he was going to go into a witness protection program, and he was supposed to meet up. And of course, that turned out to be not what he thought it was. And so after that, the debacle went down. He just knew that he would never be safe. He has to take things into his own hands. So he left Philadelphia. They were having this life going on in small town Kansas until one day, Allison was involved in an incident that was videotaped. She was kind of defending another kid, and one of the mobster's goons saw the video and recognized her. And so now they're back at it again. And so in the story, we find out how this was involved. Allison's disappearing was involved in their old life back in the day. Also, her dad's buddies who were helping him out also, were in the strike zone, of the mobster, because they were helping out, and in them coming into town and all that, their lives were kind of impacted by, their connection with her dad. And so ultimately, Ryan was able to find Allison, and they had to come back into the country after him and Allison had to come back into the country secretly, and then had to meet secretly with the authorities, the FBI and those organizations, to be able to get back into the country, to be able to get protection, and then to be able to go figure out how they're going to have a life now after all this has happened. And so it goes into the whole, story of their life and what happened in the past, and tie everything back together. And then how their lives, the plan for their lives now that they're back into the country, and what the plans are after that to stay safe and all that. So this one went all over the place. I, for one, didn't expect when the book started that this girl would still be alive, because it's been years and years. So, but we know that her disappearance was, a little bit more complicated than it seemed from, the initial story that was told when the book began. So I did enjoy that it was a plot that kind of blossomed into something else and had different elements to it. So I would definitely recommend this. I would give it 4 stars. So if you have read or listened to this book, let me know your thoughts. Until next